Let's take a look at instructional settings. Among the most common questions concerning training and development is where it will occur. Generally, training and development take place either on site or off site. However, some training and development settings don't neatly fit into either category. Training provided on site is usually organizational centric. Often, this training is designed or delivered by a coworker, a supervisor or manager, or member of the human resource department. Even when it's provided by an outside vendor, the training occurs on the organization's property and is often customized to address specific organizational need. Not all organizational settings are the same, and there are important differences among those that can be categorized as on-site. For example, on-site training can occur on the job itself, where they normally perform the same functions. However, on-site training can also refer to using a conference or training room within the facility where the trainees work. Training and development provided off-site tends to be less organization-centric. The content is less likely to be specifically developed or tailored for the organization. Off-site training also encompasses a range of options. Locally, organizations can take advantage of training opportunities within the communities where they reside. Looking at non-local off-site options, organizations can send employees to conferences in another city or state. While seemingly the categories of on-site and off-site should encompass all settings, the corporate university is a notable option for providing training and development that encompasses characteristics of both on and off-site instruction. Corporate universities often have their own campuses or, at very least, buildings, which are dedicated in terms of trainers and facility space to establish curricula. As such, corporate universities are relatively centralized, so unless trainees are taking an online course or by chance are located nearby, they'll need to travel to the corporate university. No matter where it's located, the corporate university is focused on the organization's need. When deciding on an instructional setting, organizations should consider several factors, including standardization, fidelity, costs, social capital, and reward value. Control and standardization often work together when it comes to designing and delivering training. First, control involves how much influence an organization has over the content and process of training. Generally, organizations have the most control over training design and delivery when it's provided on site. Not only do off-site settings normally lack this control over design, but there's no guarantee about delivery. Having control facility standardization, like different groups of trainees experience the same training, is important. Fidelity is the degree to which the environment for training mirrors the environment where the trainees will use what they've learned. Higher levels of fidelity are generally better, but not always possible. Fidelity increases the effectiveness of training through two different mechanisms. First, it increases employee motivation and aligns with pedagogy. Second, fidelity promotes the transferability of training. In general, the more realistic the setting, the more likely trainees will be able to utilize what they've learned after completing the training. When providing training, another consideration is how much it costs to provide the level of investment and what that represents. This is one reason that organizations provide low fidelity training even if it's less effective than high fidelity training. When discussing the direct costs of training, it's useful to separate fixed costs from variable costs. Variable costs increase the number of people being trained. Fixed costs present a larger concern when the training is developed or delivered on site. If an organization develops its own training program, then it must pay for the development regardless of whether it delivers the training. When managers think about training or development, their initial focus is on increasing their employees' human capital. Human capital focuses on the value of the knowledge, skills, and abilities possessed by employees. Social capital, the value of an individual's relationships, increases with the strength and scope of a person's work. These relationships have value because they improve performance and outcomes. People with strong internal organizational networks are more embedded in the organization, which makes them more likely to know who to go for to help and who's likely to engage in turnover. Social capital is not only a side benefit of providing training. Some employees also view training as a reward. The reward value of training can come from one of several sources. Extrinsically motivated employees may value development to earn more money or be eligible for promotion. Intrinsically motivated employees may simply value the opportunity to learn and the ability to engage in self actualization. Each of these sources could be considered desirable, and organizations should consider them when designing, delivering, and supporting transfer of training. One of the most common forms of training provided to individuals is on the job training known as OJT. OJT is used frequently and has many benefits, including the fidelity of the training and a low level of investment. One potential disadvantage is the level of control or standardization. OJT falls along a wide spectrum of formality. Generally, formalized on the job training produces better outcomes than more informal versions, but unfortunately, traditional OJT is relatively informal. In OJT training, the choice of trainer matters because the ability and quality of the person providing the training has an impact on the experience and subsequent learning of the trainee. Informally, a trainer can be selected to provide on the job training by being the only person available, the best worker, or the employee's supervisor. The most simplistic choice of trainer is the person who, at the moment, has the time to provide the training. But just because people have free time does not mean they're good workers, much less they would make good trainers. While it's relevant to consider the technical aptitude of the potential trainer, it should not be the only criteria used to make the decision. Organizations should select trainers based on their communication and interpersonal skills. Providing the trainer with support is critically important. Among the ways that management can support on the job training are to provide adequate time for training, to train the trainers, and to reward them. Both trainers and trainees need time for instruction and learning to occur. Trainers can feel rushed if not given the proper time to train, which can result in either the breadth or depth of instruction being compromised. In addition to allowing trainers the time to provide on-the-job training, organizations should consider improving the skill sets of those they ask to train others. Training the trainer is an important function that can improve the effectiveness of OJT. Motivation is an important factor for those asked to do the training. Management needs to be mindful to understand that trainees have other job responsibilities as well. In on-the-job training, design encompasses a range of activities. At a minimum, design could just mean developing a checklist of what a trainer is supposed to teach someone. Design may also involve identifying a set of learning objectives or developing instructional aids that could be used during training itself. These activities both support the trainer and promote the effectiveness of training. Training manuals are a type of instructional aid that organizations can provide to facilitate and improve the delivery of training. Training manuals provide greater depth of information and thereby support. Training, regardless of type, becomes more formal when it's evaluated. Organizations should evaluate on-the-job training for several reasons. If people are experiencing problems with learning the material, trainers can also use evaluations to improve the training itself, which should improve learning for subsequent trainees. Evaluating what the trainee learns makes on-the-job training more formal and can improve the learning experience. It also creates a rubric for the trainers, which makes it easier for them to ensure that they've fully and adequately trained someone. It is also useful to evaluate the trainer. Not only does it provide feedback that allows the design to be revised or the trainer to improve, but evaluating the trainer also increases accountability. Trainers who are held accountable are expected to work harder to make sure that trainees master the content of the training. A useful but often overlooked consideration in training design and implementation is the configuration of the physical learning space. The obvious difference between spaces concerns the number of trainees or participants who can receive instruction at any one time. Technology and room layout can also impact the effectiveness of a specific training method. Broadly speaking, lectures and case studies are possible in most spaces, but the effectiveness of other methods can be impacted greatly by the configuration and constraints of a specific classroom. While corporate universities and larger organizations may have multiple spaces available, most organizations are unable to refurbish a room to accommodate an individual training or development program. One warning that most veteran trainers share is to prepare for the unexpected. Never assume that the space will be fully functional. Just because a room has a whiteboard, don't assume that chalk or markers or erasers will be available. While the layout of a classroom can be a constraint if tables and chairs aren't moved, often a trainer will be able to exert some influence over the layout. Therefore, a trainer should give some careful thought into room setup of tables and chairs in a room. Here's some examples of different types of setups: circles, rows, pods, or horseshoes to promote the best learning experience for trainees. The most traditional of these approaches is rows, which are good for keeping the focus of the room towards the board, screen, or instructor. The setup is particularly beneficial when lecture is the primary method of instruction. Sitting in a circle makes it easier to hold a discussion because everyone can see each other. The main downside comes when those sitting with their backs to the screen need to move or contort themselves to read what the trainer's presenting. The horseshoe represents a compromise between rows and circles. While the room is still oriented around the trainer, trainees can see each other around the screen as well. Setting up a classroom in pods is the most progressive of the options. The strength and emphasis of the setup is on group work. Learning occurs more experientially with trainees working on projects or cases with one another. The best of these classrooms, not only are trainees situated in small groups, but there are boards or screens on each wall to facilitate collaboration. Although the settings of speakers and courses and conferences don't generally involve design, managers still have decisions to make. Conferences normally have upfront registration and tuition costs, so managers need to be sure to make good choices in terms of how they allocate their training and development budget. Aside from costs, managers should consider a few key factors when deciding to send an employee to an offsite training or development option. One factor is to consider the content. Managers should also make sure that there's a large degree of overlap between the content offered and the content identified as part of the needs analysis. Another reason an organization may still send an employee is social capital. Sometimes it isn't about what an employee learns as much about what the employee meets. If it's sending an employee to a training or development program, the organization wants some assurance that the employee will receive quality instruction and increase the likelihood of training transfer. Although a manager may not know the specific trainer ahead of time, the manager will hopefully have some experience with the organization or know its reputation. Corporate universities primary or exclusively educate the employees within the organization that created them and should not be confused with for-profit institutions of higher education. Corporate universities come in many shapes and sizes. At one end of the spectrum, they resemble traditional institutions of higher education with campus buildings and degree programs. At the other end, they look more like a robust training department, distinguishable mainly in orientation and branding. Because of resource needs, corporate universities are not typically found in small organizations. Corporate universities tend to be more proactive in their delivery of training and development than traditional training departments. Maintaining a corporate university signals to employees that the organization values and encourages employee learning and development. While the extent of the curriculum within corporate universities varies, the level of control and standardization in delivery of content is greater in corporate universities than in many other instructional settings. Curriculum generally encompasses the three C's. Corporate citizenship involves teaching employees about the organization's value, culture, history, and traditions. Contextual frameworks educate employees about how the organization interacts with its environment. Finally, core workplace competencies focus on the KSAs that will make employees more productive.